One way to think about happiness is to focus on externals. What kind of external conditions support and nurture our happiness? And there's lots of interesting research in this area. So, for instance, in general, married people tend to be happier than single people. There's also research about our level of income, which shows that up to a certain level, having more money does indeed make us happier, but that plateaus. You get to a certain point where having any more money doesn't lead to an increase in happiness. Another way to think about happiness is to think about the beliefs and attitudes which support happiness, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in. So not so much focused on the externals. And two researchers called Foster and Hicks took precisely this approach when they investigated happiness. And in this film we'll follow what they call the 9 steps to lifelong happiness. Intention. This is the active desire to choose happiness over unhappiness, the commitment to be happy and the determination to do what's required to be happy. This one might sound rather strange really, because we may think, well, we don't actually choose to be happy. We're happy if things work out our way. And obviously if difficult things happen to us, if very terrible things happen to us, there's no possible way we could be happy. So what do they mean by saying that happiness is a choice? I think really what they're getting at here is the idea that whatever happens to you, whatever conditions life throws at you, you have the choice about how to respond. How you focus on what's happened, how you choose to react to what's happened, are all things within your own control. And this reflects the way that Foster and Hicks define happiness. So they call happiness a profound, enduring feeling of contentment, capability and centeredness. A rich sense of well-being that comes from knowing you can deal productively and creatively with all that life offers, both the good and the bad. The next step is accountability, the choice to live the life you want to, and the emphatic refusal to blame others for your own unhappiness. And this one's very, very interesting, because obviously to blame others seems a perfectly natural thing to do sometimes. Sometimes people are unkind to us, sometimes people don't do what we want, and blame is obviously the natural response to that. And in some ways, blame seems to let us off the hook. Well, if it's your fault, what's happened, it's not my fault, so I'm kind of okay. However, I think the problem with blame is, in a sense, it can feed a feeling of powerlessness. If I'm blaming you for me being unhappy, then I'm implicitly saying you have the power over my happiness or unhappiness. If I refuse to become involved in that blame game, then I'm saying actually my sense of well-being doesn't depend on how you are with me. My sense of well-being is about how I respond to what you're doing. And this is not to say that we won't feel pain, disappointment, frustration when other people behave to us in unpleasant or disappointing ways. It's just saying we're no longer going to pin our happiness on anybody doing exactly what we want. The next step is identification. This is the ongoing process of looking deeply at your life and finding out what makes you uniquely happy. So this involves putting aside all those messages about what's supposed to make us happy. It involves putting aside other people's views and opinions about what makes us happy, and actually thinking, well, actually, what is it that makes me happy? What is it that leads to my well-being? And a friend of mine who's a meditation teacher is a wonderful example of this. He says that when he was a musician in New York, he was going to perform a really big piece and he was going to be successful, everybody was going to come, all the attention was on him, and this was a wonderful success, a great sign of achievement. And actually what he found was that this experience didn't actually make him happy. It was a stressful time, it was a difficult time, it was an excessively busy time. And sometime a little bit later, he was just walking down the pavement and noticed a particular way that the light was shining. Something about the way that the sun was setting, the way that the light was shining on the pavement. And he just took a joy in that simple thing. And for him this was a really fundamental shift about what supports, nurtures his sense of well-being. Was it success, fame, popularity, all the things that sometimes our culture can put so much store on? Or was it actually this more simple moment, a moment of appreciating something rather small, but something that actually touched him quite deeply? Centrality is the non-negotiable insistence to put that which creates happiness at the centre of our lives. Sometimes this might require a certain courage. We may have to put happiness before the search to earn as much money as possible, before our wish to be as secure and stable as possible. Maybe we'll need to take risks in order to fulfill what makes us really happy. However, these are risks that happy people are prepared to take. Recasting is the choice to turn problems into opportunities, to turn what is most difficult in our life into something that can be used as a source of meaning, something that we can grow in the face of. And I think this one needs to be treated with a great deal of care, really. Because if this ever came across like a demand, I think it could be very uncompassionate, really. To say to somebody in a great deal of distress that somehow they've got to see the positive in it, they've got to grow from it, could be a way of denying how difficult life is. Just the deep distress that we feel when when life throws us really difficult, tragic circumstances. However, in another way, this is a message of hope, that even in those most testing of times, they can be used as an opportunity to become more wise, to become compassionate, to develop a loving response to what's happened. The next step is giving, the choice to share yourself with friends, with family, and with the world at large, to give something to the wider community without any particular expectation of a return. And I think this step points to a real paradox here, that the more we focus on what we want, more I'm thinking about what I want, what I'm going to get, what I need to make me happy, the more I'm stuck and trapped in my own little world. The more that the focus turns outwards towards what can I give, how can I be generous, how can I make a contribution, in many ways, even those thoughts bring a tremendous relief and release from that self-centeredness. And I certainly know this from my own case when I think about the problems and difficulties we sometimes have here at the college. When I'm focused on what I need to get out of this, what's going to make it okay for me, I'm feeling hard done by, how can I get other people to do what I want, it can feel very stuck, and that sense of frustration can feel very solid. But as soon as the train of thought is turned outwards, how can I give something here, how can I make a contribution, what can I do to make it better, then immediately there's a greater sense of well-being and a greater sense of peace. Truthfulness is the choice to be honest with yourself, to be honest with others, to have something that you can hold firm to, a sense of integrity and honesty that runs very deep. And this is really important because I think when we're dishonest, that seems to sow the seeds of separation, of distance, of a lack of connection. And I certainly, again, think about this in my own life, in my late teenage years. For various reasons, I wanted people to think that my stepmom was actually my biological mum. And this is simply something I wanted to do for my own reasons. There was nothing really particularly malicious about that. But over the years, this became quite a kind of secret, until on one occasion, it just became quite untenable, really, partly because there was a picture of my dad and stepmom getting married that obviously hadn't been taken that long ago. But when that piece of dishonesty had been found out, when that could be released, the feeling of peace and relief about it was absolutely tremendous. There's no longer any need to defend a kind of false story. There's no longer any need to put up a pretense. And when we're honest, when that pretense, that false stories are not happening, then again there's much more connection and much more sense of peace and well-being. Appreciation means appreciating all the good things in your life and all the people in your life. Turning each experience into something special. And this I think is very interesting because often I have the idea that there are two scenarios in my mind. There's the way things actually are, and then there's the way things are if they were just a little bit better. So everything else in the world stays the same, but I have a little bit more money, or maybe I have some better friends or some nicer clothes or whatever. And one way to foster appreciation actually is to consider how things could be a lot worse. And strange as it sounds at the moment, could I appreciate the fact that my legs are not broken? Could I appreciate the fact that the temperature is fairly constant, temperature is fairly comfortable? Can I appreciate the fact I have nice food to eat? I've got lots of lovely friends and colleagues here at the college. So by actually deliberately turning our attention to what is present, that can cultivate a sense of appreciation and helps us let go of that mentality of lack, always focusing on what's absent. The step of options means to create multiple scenarios about how we approach life, not to have fixed and definite demands about the way things have got to be. And I certainly find this one very, very interesting. As soon as I have the idea that things have got to be exactly the way that I want them, if they turn out some other way, it's going to be some horrible disaster, some tragedy, then again, I'm very much at ransom to the way things turn out. If I've got multiple scenarios, it might turn out like this, it might turn out like that, it might turn out in a way that I hadn't even considered at all. And all of those things could somehow be okay. Whatever scenario turns out, I can deal with it. Then there's a much greater sense of equanimity in the face of the different things life brings us. When we come at life with fixed demands, it's like this or it's a disaster, we set ourselves up to suffer. We can think about happiness as a way of getting all the conditions that we need to make us feel okay in place, to get everything externally to us somehow in a way that suits us. One difficulty with thinking about that kind of happiness based on conditions is that conditions are by their very nature unreliable. They change, they shift. The way something is one way will not be the way it continues to be in the future. Even the most wonderful marriage, maybe it lasts 25 years, 40 years, 60 years, in the end will come to an end. Even the most wonderful car, the most wonderful house, these things change, they shift. They're not fundamentally and permanently reliable. And this leads us on to a very different way of looking at happiness. Not happiness as trying to create the conditions that suit me, but a happiness which is to an extent independent of conditions. A happiness that says, whatever the way life is, I can respond to it with wisdom, I can respond to it with compassion. And strangely enough, once we give up the idea that the perfect partner, the perfect house, the perfect car, the perfect job are going to make us happy, that doesn't lead to resignation, it doesn't lead to depression, but in fact that way of viewing things could be profoundly liberating.